we've divided it up. I had just become a full-time director of Priests for Life in late 93. And I was at the Human Life International Conference that was held in Irvine, California. And one of the things Father Paul Marks asked me to do was to help moderate the various workshops. There were many workshops going on with many speakers, and the moderator was charged with introducing the speaker and then guiding the Q&A session if there was one. And so I introduced Dr. Bernard Nathanson to a very large room filled with pro-life people from around the world. And they had come to hear him talk. At the last minute, he changed the direction that his talk would take. And he said, I'm just going to talk to you without slides or charts or notes about my journey as an ex-abortionist and my journey to faith. Now, keep in mind, this man who started the abortion industry, co-founded NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League, which has now changed its name, but same organization. This man was an agnostic. He just did not believe that we could know anything about God, and he was converted, as you will hear in the first part of this talk, to a pro-life position based on science, based specifically on the interaction he had over a long period of time directly with the unborn child. Scientific observation led him to the moral conclusion that abortion was wrong. Now, this was a man who in various ways was responsible for some 75,000 abortions, some by his own hand, some by his supervision of medical students, others by the abortion facility that he ran. And for someone like that, first of all, when you're doing that many abortions, you're justifying it in your own mind with layers and layers and layers of rationalization and denial. For someone like that to then admit that abortion is the killing of a human being is a very dramatic conversion. I mean, literally as dramatic as St. Paul's conversion. And we have in the first part of the talk I'm going to share with you now, his description of that journey, again, through direct observation of the unborn child, to the point where he believed abortion was wrong. Later in the program tonight, I'm going to let you hear an even more dramatic part of the talk where he discusses his journey from agnosticism to faith, and specifically Catholic faith. But first, let's listen now to the words of Dr. Bernard Nathanson, ex-abortionist, turned pro-life advocate and eventually bioethicist, describing his journey from pro-abortion to pro-life. Dr. Nathanson.
But anyway, I was up there on one floor of this hospital, and I would be putting the saline, the hypertonic saline, into a woman 23 weeks pregnant. And on the next floor down, I'd have someone in labor 23 weeks pregnant, and I'd be trying to salvage this baby. And the nurses were caught in the same bind, in the same moral whipsaw. What were we doing here? Were we going to save babies, or were we going to kill them? So I finally restricted my abortion practice initially to those who had a compelling medical reason for abortion, also including rape and incest. This was in the late 70s. And I wrote a book called Aborting America. Some of you have read it. It's been out of print a long time, but there is still a paperback, I believe, available. And in that book, I listed a lot of conditions, medical conditions, which would justify abortion, even though the book came down on the side of pro-life. In 1978, I did 2 or 3 abortions on medical grounds. And one in 1979, I think in April of 1979. And then I decided that there were no reasons for abortion anytime. because this person in the womb was a living human being, and we could not continue that war against that most defenseless of all human beings. So that was the last one I did. And I published another book in 1983 called The Abortion Papers, which was a very political book and really didn't contribute a lot, except it had a long section, three, I'm sorry, one on fetology. I reviewed all of the relevant literature on fetology. Now, in order to get some idea of the immense influence of this new technology on the practice of obstetrics and the fetus, let me explain to you that there is a huge book called the Cumulus Medicus Index, or Index Cumulus Medicus. It lists every article published in any medical journal in the world, in every language in the world. And out of curiosity, in 1979 or 80, when I was writing this second book, I went back to the Cumulative Index Medicus of 1969, and under the heading Fetus, Physiology of and Anatomy of, there were 5 articles in the world's literature. And then I went to the 1979 Cumulus Index Medicus. There were 2,800 articles. Last year, there were close to 5,000 articles on the fetus itself. So you can see that the technology had opened up a whole world to us, the world of the unborn. And began to understand, too, that 200 or 300 years ago, childhood was not even understood as a special time in our lives, that children at the age of 5 in the 17th century were placed in the factories. There were no considerations about children developing, growing needs, special needs. And it was not until the last 100 years, the last century, that we've understood that childhood is a special band in the continuing spectrum of life, just as adolescence is, adulthood, and senescence. It's just another band. Well, when I began to learn about fetology, it dawned upon me finally that the prenatal 9 months are just another band in that spectrum, and probably the most important 9 months of our lives. That's when your organs are forming, your brain is forming, your first impressions, sensory impressions emerge. You can distinguish in that womb music one from another. I have done this. I've put Mozart in a tape player and held it against a woman's abdomen at, say, 7 months, and the baby will move a little, and then you put on Van Halen, and the baby's jumping all over the place. Hard, real, heavy metal rock. And that baby, and if you put you put an electronic monitor on that baby, you'll see the heart rate all over the tape. It's incredible. I mean, this is a learning time. It's a time of organizing ourselves. It is the most important time of our lives. And to disrupt it, to abort it, is inexcusable. It's unethical, it's intolerable, it's inexcusable, it's a crime. It is a crime, and I don't make any bones about using that word. It is a crime. Well, in 1984, going back 10 years now, I have a restless mind. My father, in his yearbook, when graduating from medical school, everybody had to pick a quote for their photograph. And my father's quote was, an insatiable thirst for knowledge. And I think he, in some crazy gene or other, he passed that on to me. I mean, there's gene mapping, and I don't know that they'll ever find that gene, but I have a feeling there is one. And in any case, in 1984, I began to ask myself, we've done all these abortions, but what actually happens in an abortion? What really happens in an abortion? I mean, it's a blind procedure. You don't see what you're doing. You put an instrument up into the uterus, and you turn on a motor, and a suction machine goes on, and something is vacuumed out. It ends up as a little pile of meat in a gauze bag. So I said to a friend of mine who was doing maybe 15 or 20 abortions a day, look, do me a favor, Jay, I said. Next Saturday, when you're doing all these abortions, put an ultrasound apparatus on the mother, on the woman, and tape it for me. Tape them all. Tape 30 of them. So he said, okay, it's no problem. He just would put an ultrasound apparatus on, and then he'd go about his business and flip the tape machine on. And he had a screen in front of him. He could see what he was doing and what was happening. And then he handed me the tapes. And I looked at them with him in an editing studio. We went to an editing studio and we ran the tapes. He never did another abortion again. And I was appalled at what I saw. Absolutely appalled. Shaken to the roots, to the very roots of my soul. So I selected one tape which showed the features more clearly than anything else. Some of the tapes were of not very good quality. And I began to show it at various pro-life gatherings around the country. At that time I was away speaking at pro-life meetings every weekend of the year. But I began to show this tape, and the reaction we got was so intense and so dramatic that I was approached finally by a man named Don Smith here in California, who said, look, let's make a film around your tape. And I agreed. I thought it was a good idea. And we did. And it was called The Silent Scream. And we showed it for the first time in Fort Lauderdale on the 3rd of January of 1985. And the reaction, of course, was instantaneous. The media grabbed it. Everybody was up in arms about it. It represented two things. One, an enormous threat to the pro-abortion forces because it was so powerful. And two, it escalated the whole abortion war. It's not really a debate. We don't debate with each other, pro-life and pro-choice. We scream at each other. But it elevated the war into a new stratum, as it were, a technological stratum. For the first time, we had the technology and they had nothing. And although they trotted out all their heaviest hitters to denounce the tape and say it had been manipulated and I played with the speed and I'd looped it and this and that, finally, we sent the tape to a man named Ian Donald in Scotland, a doctor. Ian Donald was the inventor of ultrasound. He was by then very old. But we submitted the tape to him, and I said to him, look, I want your honest opinion. Has this been manipulated in any way, shape, or form? Because the media in the United States are denouncing this film. The New York Times had run several editorials on it already, and they're calling it a fake. So he looked at the tape. Not only did he say it was absolutely genuine, he swore out an affidavit to that effect, which I still have in my files. And he died within 6 months. But that affidavit is still there. And then I taped the doctor who did the abortion, Dr. Kellenson, J. Kellenson. And on the tape, I asked him questions. Was it true? Is this what happened? Was the tape in any way manipulated? He said no. It was all as you see it. But I think, when I say this humbly, it has saved a lot of babies. At least I hope it has. In 1987, we became aware of the fact that in this country every year there are 120,000 late abortions. That is, abortions after the 13th week of pregnancy. 120,000, 400 a day, going right up to the 9th month. So, through work and manipulation, which I will not go into here, Kellenson, again, put a hysteroscope, an optical instrument, into the womb of a woman at 19 and a half weeks, pregnant. Now this instrument has a strong light and a lens at one end and an eyepiece at the other, and if you put it into the womb, you put it in with a sharp instrument, you introduce it, you can look in the womb and see the baby. What we did was we clamped a camera on the eyepiece, and then he went ahead with the abortion. So you could see the baby being torn apart in this film. And we made a film around that called Eclipse of Reason. Some of you have seen this. It is a terribly strong film. It's a film which will turn your stomach. I remember the first time we showed the clips from that in Paris at a large pro-life convention, a doctor sitting in the first row got physically ill and vomited. He was so overwhelmed by the power of the images.
Well, brothers and sisters, this is Father Frank again. Is that amazing or what? I mean, that is, and you know, it's happening in the lives of many others too. One of the things we do at Priests for Life is to promote the Society of Centurions, ex-abortionists, who, like Dr. Nathanson, have made this incredible journey, and again, based on science, based on evidence. You'll notice, by the way, how the pro-abortion people always try to cover up the evidence that can have such an impact on the minds of people who are open to the truth. Because when he made that silent scream video, as he described, notice how the other side was saying things very, very similar, in fact identical, to what they said just a few years ago when the recordings came out of the atrocities committed by Planned Parenthood with the selling of body parts. What did the enemies of life say? Oh, those were tampered with. Those were edited. They were fake. They said exactly the same thing decades ago of Dr. Nathanson's film, The Silent Scream, because whenever you do something that actually exposes the evil of abortion and the evil of the abortion industry, the other side can do nothing but continue to retreat into denial. Well, praise God that Dr. Nathanson broke that denial. We're going to take our usual break now, and then after these announcements, you're going to hear the very dramatic telling by Dr. Nathanson himself of how he came to faith. So please stay with us.
On October 2nd, the Church observes the Feast of the Guardian Angels and reflects on the fact that from the first moment of our existence, God assigns an angel to watch over us at every moment of our lives. Of course, this means that each unborn child has a guardian angel too. If God cares enough about each unborn child to create that child and then assign him or her an angel, then certainly he expects us also to exercise some care and vigilance to speak up for and protect the lives of those children. It also means that we can pray to the guardian angel of each unborn child we are trying to save, as well as to the angels of the mother and father of that child, so they will have the courage to choose life. This is Father Stephen Imbrato of Priests for Life on Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home.
October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, yet many people remain unaware that the single most avoidable risk factor for breast cancer is abortion. In 1986, government scientists wrote a letter to the prestigious British medical journal The Lancet. They said, quote, "Induced abortion before first-term pregnancy increases the risk of breast cancer," end quote. In 2003, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons issued a statement calling on doctors to inform patients about a highly plausible relationship between abortion and breast cancer. Most studies on this topic have shown evidence of this relationship. Yet those who advocate abortion don't want to hear it. It's time to tell them anyway. This is Father Frank Pavone, National Director of Priests for Life on Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home.
October is observed as Respect Life Month in the Catholic Church in America. The parishes are encouraged to give attention to the issue of abortion, and Priests for Life is working as hard as ever to equip the priests with tools they need to teach, preach, and mobilize people to do something to end the killing of the unborn. If you want your parish praying for the unborn, and if you want your priest preaching about abortion, then please direct them to our website, priestsforlife.org, and specifically to the homily hymns and general intercessions that we prepare for each Sunday of the year. Let's also urge our pastors to start a Respect Life committee in every parish that does not yet have one. May this Respect Life month save many lives. This is Janet Morena of Priests for Life on Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home.
Well, friends, Father Frank Pavone here once again. Welcome to this next section of the Gospel of Life program on Radio Maria. As always, you can communicate with us about the things you hear on this program by emailing us at info@gospeloflife.com. That's info@gospeloflife.com. Well, for those of you that just joined us, we're listening in this program to a tape from Dr. Bernard Nathanson, now deceased. But he was the key leader in starting the abortion industry in America. In his words, he uncaged the abortion monster in the United States. And he was one of the world's foremost abortionists. And indeed, as we just heard, he, on scientific basis alone, came to the conclusion that abortion should never be permitted. But then he was still an agnostic when he turned pro-life. In fact, when I first met him, he still did not have faith. But then in this talk, in which I moderated, it was a workshop session at the International Human Life International Conference in 1994, you're going to hear him now talk about how he came to faith, and you're going to hear him explain, my friends, how it was the love that you and I and others in the pro-life movement show to those even who disagree with us. The love we show, the warmth we show, the reflection of the image of God that we show breaks the shell of atheism and agnosticism. You will hear him tell you how that happened in his own words. Let's listen now again to the testimony of Dr. Bernard Nathanson.
And so I continued along in the pro-life vein, making films and writing articles and books and lecturing. And then something even more extraordinary happened. Let me read you just a short paragraph from Albert Einstein, his book, Out of My Later Years. He said, "Now, even though the realms of religion and science in themselves are closely marked off from each other, nevertheless there exist between the two strong reciprocal relationships and dependencies. Though religion may be that which determines the goal, it is nevertheless learned from science in the broadest sense. What means will contribute to the attainment of the goals it has set up? But science can only be created by those who are thoroughly imbued with the aspiration toward truth and understanding. This source of feeling, however, springs from the sphere of religion. The situation may be expressed by an image. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. And so, lecturing to pro-life audiences, writing pro-life material, I began to feel an infusion, and that's the only way I can describe it, of love and spirituality coming from these audiences, from all of you, into me. I felt the love for the unborn. I felt the love of life. I felt the reverence for life. And gradually the hard shell of atheism began to crack. You know, Chesterton once said that if there were no God, there'd be no atheists. Of course, it's true. But I began to be troubled by the fact that there was still the shell, though it was cracking, because it wasn't letting in anything or all of this feeling, this infusion. And I thought I had to open myself up and let it come in. So I began to read widely in Roman Catholicism. And my hero was this man, Malcolm Muggeridge. Let me read to you a passage which, more than anything else, has brought me to the very brink of conversion. He said this, he said, "It has never been possible for me to persuade myself that the universe could have been created, and we, Homo sapiens so-called, have generation after generation somehow made our appearances to sojourn briefly on our tiny earth solely in order to mount the interminable soap opera, with the same characters and situations endlessly recurring, that we call history. It would be like building a great stadium for a display of tiddlywinks, or a vast opera house for a harmonica recital. There must, in other words, be another reason for our existence, and that of the universe, than just getting through the days of our life as best we can. Some other destiny than merely using up such physical, intellectual, and spiritual creativity has been vouchsafed to us. This, anyway, has been the strongly held conviction of the greatest artists, saints, philosophers, and until quite recent times, scientists through the Christian centuries, who have all assumed that the New Testament promise of eternal life is valid, and that the great drama of the Incarnation, which embodies it, is indeed the master drama of our existence. To suppose that those distinguished believers were all credulous fools, whose folly and credulity in holding such beliefs has now been finally exposed, would seem to me to be untenable. And anyway, I'd rather be wrong with Dante and Shakespeare and Milton, with Augustine of Hippo and Francis of Assisi, with Dr. Johnson, Blake, and Dostoevsky, than right with Voltaire, Rousseau, Darwin, the Huxleys, Herbert Spencer, H.G. Wells, Bernard Shaw, Harry Blackman, Edward Kennedy, and the like. So I come to you here today on the brink of conversion, believing the hand of God has moved me here, believing that God will